Hello and welcome to another edition of GNAT TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today is Monday, January 28th, and it's also a pleasure to be joined here in the studio by three of our area state representatives. We're very happy to have with us today Cynthia Browning, who has been a state rep since 2007, is one of the two representatives from the district that includes Manchester, Arlington, Sunderland, and Sandgate. And she is now starting her, ninth term, would that be?
Eighth term.
Eighth term.
Something.
Time flies
Long
when
time, yeah.
you're having fun.
Yeah.
Also great to be joined by Kathleen James, who won election to the other seat in the two-member district that includes Manchester, Arlington, Sunderland, and Sandgate last November. She serves on the Education Committee. I should have mentioned that Cynthia serves on the Ways and Means Committee, and that's a repeat performance from last year, if I recall correctly. And also great to have with us today Linda Joy Sullivan, who has been a state rep now since 2016, starting her second term, representing the district that includes Dorset, Danby, Peru, Mount Tabor, and Landgrove, and is serving on the Corrections and Institutions Committee. Welcome all of you, and thank you so much for making the time out of what I know are very busy schedules to be here with us today and share some of your thoughts on the legislative session as we're getting underway now 2 or 3 weeks since the start of the session. And our timing is fortunate, it seems like to me. Last week, Governor Phil Scott gave his annual budget address to all of you up there in the State House. And from down here, it seemed like there was a different tone that seemed to be struck by the governor in the message. The past 2 years, the affordability message, no new taxes and fees, seemed to be kind of the centerpieces of what he was trying to emphasize. This year, it sounded like, and I'll let you all give your reaction since you were there and heard it, but it sounded like there was a bit of a more give and take kind of collaborative tone sort of struck. And Cynthia, since you're the most senior of the group here, we'll start with you. And since you're also on the Ways and Means and interested in tax policy and all that, what was your takeaway from the governor's talk?
Well, I definitely agree with you that there was a different tone to the address and it was less combative. But he kind of has to do that because there are more Democrats than there were before, and so the question of whether his veto would be overridden or not is much more in play. So he really has to do that. But I think that he also has learned a lot, and he's trying to figure out how to take his affordability, economic development, and fit it with the realities of what we are facing in Vermont. I think one of the good things in the address is it sounds like the administration and the legislative committees are trying to figure out a way to address the unfunded liabilities, the pension liabilities, and that's a really big issue. And it sounds like they're trying to work out some way to go forward with that. I have my eye on that. I'm very concerned about the effect that those liabilities will have on our budget in the future, but it sounds like they're really talking together. He's very concerned about economic development and the demographic challenges that we face in terms of, not as many young people as we would like. I feel a little bit concerned that he still thinks that just having targeted tax credits and tax deductions in certain places or little grants is going to solve that problem. I mean, those things can sometimes be flashy and attract attention, but if you want economic development, you have to do the basics. You have to have low and stable tax rates, you have to have transportation infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure, support for education for young people, workforce training, sewer and water. You got to do the basics really well. Economic development is sort of like trying to be healthy. We know you have to get sleep, eat right, and exercise. There's no magic bullets. There's no shortcuts. And that's true of economic development. So I'm a little concerned that he's still doing these little flashy things. But he does have money in there for better telecommunications coverage, and I like that. He understands about workforce training, and that's a good thing. But the suggestions that came to House Ways and Means really involved a lot of fiddling around the edges with these different tax giveaways, and they don't really have evidence that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. They have stories. So that's kind of a problem to give away $500,000, $1 million, and we don't know what it's really going to do. The other problem with their approach is that they have assumed that changes in legislation will bring in $7 million more from the online sales tax that we are collecting now through certain sorts of changes in who we're collecting it for. And they are going to say, since that sales tax goes into the ed fund, we're going to put the cost of childcare in the ed fund. And childcare is certainly very important for workforce development. I support increasing that funding, but it shouldn't be in the ed fund. The ed fund is pre-K through 12, so they are going to shift a new permanent obligation into the ed fund when they have a temporary increase in money. So that's the kind of thing that I have grave concerns about, and when you look at the details of the proposal, you're like, not so much. So that's my initial take, and I think we'll have to look to see what common ground the legislature and the administration can find on all these different kind of tax things.
All right. Linda, what was your reaction? Did it seem like things were kind of moving in a better direction, or what'd you make of it?
So I think that the collaboration, the I want to collaborate was key. That was my biggest takeaway. Everybody needs to talk and talk early. I think that, to the Senate's credit, I think that the Senate Pro Tem came out and said that right away. We need to be credible. We have a majority. We need to be credible. We need to start a dialogue. I think the governor agreed with that, and I know I do. I think that my concern, like Representative Browning's, is the pension and the other employee benefits, the health care issues. I have grave concerns that the bond financing, the debt financing may be pushed more towards a pay-go, and we need to analyze that. It doesn't mean that you force a capital bill to stop to get appropriation expenditures still going. So I think we need to look at that very closely. We need to see if it's really just pay-go or if it's pay-as-you-go financing, what is going on. I don't think that it should be driven by the the bond rating, as much as everybody's trying to use that as where we go. I think the governor is now ready to come forward and do some action, because I need to see some action. Last year it was, okay, here are my thoughts, this is what I want to do, but now it's time to say, what are we going to do? I'm not convinced that every single suggestion is action, other than moving a little bit of money here to cover this to make it really be something that's worthwhile. So I have some delving into the line items when it hits our committee, which it hit on Friday, so I'll be looking at that as well.
Okay. Kathleen, what was your takeaway from that? So that was your first budget address that you got to hear.
I know. I've been in the legislature for 2 weeks, so
must have been pretty exciting.
So yay!
I think.
You know, like everyone else, obviously, I was very encouraged by the collaborative approach that he seemed to bring to the table. I never thought last year I was certainly not alone in this. You know, trying to govern by veto and by inflexible positions like no new taxes, no new fees, I just don't see it as a way to move forward. So to see that everybody's trying to get on a better page this year, not only the governor, you know, and his staff, but also, like you said, you know, the leadership in both the House and Senate, I think it's really encouraging. And I've been encouraged to read as well that, you know, we might have you know, a super majority, but it could be a fragile coalition. It's not some I would certainly never see it anyway as some sort of, you know, axe to be wielded. And so I hope that the Dems aren't coming at that from that point of view either, and I don't think they are. So, so that, you know, that concept of looking for the center, I think, is really important. You know, devil's always in the details. That's something that I know my colleague to the left has pretty good mastery on. You know, a source of clean water funding. Where are we going to get the money for that important project? We're under an EPA mandate to clean up our waterways. I'm not necessarily convinced that the estate tax is the way to go, but you know, I'm sure we'll see some good conversation around that. And also, you know, just kind of a one-off. But when I see proposals to pay folks to move here, you know, I'm always a little bit taken aback. You know, the Vermont State College system is looking for money. They need, I think, a higher level of funding so that they can lower their tuition rates and be more competitive with surrounding states where the state colleges do offer lower in-state tuition. And you know, when you're looking to invest dollars, I am probably always going to be coming from a place of wanting to see us invest in our own kids, in our own families, in our own institutions, rather than trying to, you know, attract folks with one-off payments. But I'm open to persuasion. I'm always open to persuasion.
Well, I couldn't help thinking, is, gee, I wish they had that when I was moving here. Where's my $10,000?
Well, that's one of the problems.
Where was mine?
Like,
I moved here from somewhere else 23 years ago. I didn't get a bribe. So anyway, you know, it's just a philosophical reaction.
Right.
I always have. Especially, I, you know, attended a presentation at CCV from the Vermont State College system before inauguration, and you know, they make a compelling case for you know, needing more support from the state so that we can offer lower in-state tuition rates for our own students. And you know, I'd rather see money funneled to something like that. So.
Okay. Well, all of you, I'm sure, have some pieces of legislation. You all kind of alluded to them there in your first reaction to the governor's speech. There are some pieces of legislation that you're either sponsoring or hoping to promote or push forward during the session. Guess I just wondered, are there some specific pieces of legislation that, you know, before we delve into some of these other big issues like minimum wage, family leave, and tax and regulate and things like that, that you want to talk about? I know the PFOA bill is one that both of you are sponsoring, so maybe we could start there. What is that all about?
Sure. So we should just roll back a little to the last 2 years. The PFOA bill that came out from the Senate was a large bill, and when it came over, it went through House Judiciary, and it actually came out with as a medical monitoring bill. A big portion of the bill was cut. It then was redrafted and brought in through House Commerce under another bill, and it was dead on arrival. It did not make it out there. So by the time it actually was vetoed, or was said that it was going to be vetoed and was vetoed with the governor's recommend, it really had already become a diluted bill. This round, it's coming back as the larger bill again. So what Representative Browning and I and many of the Bennington legislators who've signed on to it have done is make it a medical monitoring bill. We took the governor's veto. I listened to the testimony of the last round, spoke with some of the stakeholders, and tried to narrow it down with the hope that nobody is going to just buy into a bill, but they're really going to want to do something that's right for Vermont, and we need to get to a yes, whether it be in a small fashion and get there so that we can actually make something happen. The big piece is that we should not have the courts be handling the monitoring. That's not what they do. They are not in a position to turn around and say, okay, this particular case, you get 2 times or 2 pills. Okay, so we need to know who's going to do that, and that should be the Department of Health. That's their job. So that would be pretty much narrowing it down to medical monitoring, watching the legal side of it so that we don't have to have exemptions of businesses and farms, because now the language doesn't have to be that, and getting it passed so that we have a start and we have a yes, where hopefully the administration will say, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, and that bill is an example of one of the things that I think is really important with all of our legislation, and that is how do you balance rights and responsibilities? Because businesses have a right to run their manufacturing process as they see fit and use the substances that they need to use, but they also have a responsibility to protect the environment, to protect Vermonters from any negative effects of that. And Vermonters have a right to expect clean air, clean water, a clean environment. So, and they have responsibilities of their own in terms of protecting that. So I think that the PFOA bill that Representative Sullivan has taken the lead on is an example of trying to balance those rights and responsibilities, and it shows how complex the issues can be, but that we can find our way through those issues and be sure that Vermonters will be protected from any future chemical contamination, and that any corporation using these substances is forewarned warned that you better be careful. You better be careful because we're going to hold you responsible. And that's what's really good about it. I carry that idea over into some of the bills that I'm working on. And since I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, I'm very concerned about this system of all these special tax provisions, deductions, credits, exemptions that function to subsidize certain activities or certain substances, and it's kind of hidden. It's not in the budget, but it's really an allocation of revenue in a similar kind of way. And I want to try to reform some of those provisions, because I think that those deductions, corporate tax deductions, sales tax exemptions, are in effect subsidizing the use of substances that pollute our water and air. And they're subsidizing the use of fossil fuels by businesses. Businesses can deduct the cost of the fossil fuels they buy from the corporate income tax they pay. That doesn't make any sense. So I want to try to look at some of those and modify those, reduce or eliminate those before we start tacking new taxes on different kinds of things. So we have these hidden subsidies, and we need to reduce those to try to get people to change their behavior, particularly businesses. I'm also really interested in the education fund and the property tax rate, because I think there are subsidies and exemptions hidden within the education fund that mean that in effect revenue leaks out of it, and the property tax rate has to be higher. So we need to plug those leaks, because the education fund is supposed to be only for pre-K through 12 education. It's not supposed to be for subsidizing agricultural and forestry. It's not supposed to be for subsidizing housing. We need to do those things, but we need to do those in the general fund. So I'm still working on my project of purifying the tax code, and I'll probably be working on it for the rest of my time in the legislature.
It's your life's work.
And I won't get it done, but I'm going to raise that issue over and over and over again. And every once in a while, I pull the conversation in a different direction, and it does change things.
So I've often been puzzled, why is it that these two funds get commingled in the first place? I mean,
I can tell you about that.
If the education fund is supposed to be for education, and the general fund is for everything else, then it seems a pretty clear wall there. How is it that education money seeps over to the other side and vice versa?
Well, you're absolutely correct. In the Act 60, the establishing legislation for the education fund, it says you can't use this for anything else. And in fact, it even says if you do, Act 60 will be repealed. But there's this little magic word in the legislature called notwithstanding. So you can notwithstand stuff and do stuff that's actually against the law, which is, I heard about that and I was like, how can that be? That's terrible. And then I thought, wait a minute, maybe I'll want to notwithstand something sometime. So anyway, so there's that, and there's also the fact that the legislature has put in, well, we're not supposed to do it for this, but we're going to do it for that. So they've actually changed the act and said you can use it to pay for dual enrollment college, or you can use it to pay for these other things. Some of them are actually connected to education, some of them are not. But what they did is current use, which is for agricultural and forestry, and the property tax circuit breaker, which helps low-income homeowners pay their property taxes. Those programs exist before Act 60, and they were paid for in the general fund. There was a line item for each of those things, and there were battles about how much they were going to cost. When they set up Act 60, they agreed to put general fund money in along with the education property taxes, but they also moved costs in the education fund, the cost of those two programs. So it was like part of the whole deal that made Act 60 work, and I think it was a mistake, but even if it wasn't a mistake, it's wrong now because everything has grown. Those programs are driving up property taxes, and they're not education. So there's a history there, and that's how it happened. Is that helping? That's how it happened?
Yeah, no,
and I want to like reverse
we need to have a show just about this subject.
Yes,
here.
you could. Yes,
quite
you could.
Fascinating, but there's so many other things here. But anyway, Kathleen, any bills you're following in particular as the session begins to roll out?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't introduced any legislation. It's been a really interesting learning curve to find out in the first, couple weeks that I've been there how this all happens. And sign-up sheets to add your name to bills fly around like an extracurricular activities fair on the first day of high school. I mean, it's amazing. The clipboards and the folders are everywhere, and representatives are coming up and asking if you'd like to sign on to their bill. And sometimes a copy of the legislation is in the folder, and often it's not. So you can certainly get a copy of the legislation. It's not a problem, but I am definitely not the kind of person who's going to be tacking my name onto bills that I haven't read, that I haven't thought about, that I haven't had time to ask around about, and that I don't understand, maybe everything about their long-term implications or how this would play out down the road. So I've been very cautious. I am not signing my name onto a bunch of bills, especially because with many of the bills, to be perfectly honest, whether the name of Kathleen James from Manchester is added to the co-sponsor list, it's not going to impact what happens to this piece of legislation at this point in my career. The bill's going to move forward either with my name on it or not. So I've been holding back and really trying to get the lay of the land. It's interesting to me too to see, who puts the bill forward matters. Maybe that person is someone who has a rep in Montpelier for, really amazing sounding, fascinating, totally impractical ideas, or maybe that person has a real talent for, narrowing in on a piece of legislation to push one perfect little lever. That's going to then enact change. And so I'm at this point, looking and listening. I've co-sponsored, i.e. added my name to a long list of legislators on only 2 bills. I'm going to co-sponsor another one tomorrow. And that's good for me right now. I've been thinking a lot. It really forces you to think about, well, what am I here to do? And I'm here to represent, constituents in my district, and what is the most important way that I can be effective for them right now as a freshman. And so, I had to give this a lot of thought because you get hit by these, by the bills right away. So I decided that for now my responsibilities or my priorities are to respond to my constituents in a really timely and thoughtful manner. So we're focusing on my coffee. Cynthia and I are doing collaborative office hours. I'm making sure that I'm, out in the community, trying to hear people's voices, and that I'm doing a good job of responding to people's emails because the volume of email is pretty overwhelming. So if you're a constituent and you write to me about something that's impacting your life, you can rest assured that my top priority is going to be to get back to you. And I've been able to help some folks with some issues already right away by, putting out a phone call, like who can I call to find out about this? And so that matters to me. So I'm spending time on that. I'm trying to work really hard in my committee and make sure that I really understand the issues and the bills that are before my committee, because that's where I've been assigned. That's where you spend 80% of your time. And then I'm trying to carefully read and research a couple bills where I think I really want my name on that bill. And that's what I'm doing in Montpelier right now.
All right.
So,
well, as I said earlier, a couple of bills or a couple of issues seem to be kind of rising to the surface, at least as so far, and it's still a very young session, and some of them are kind of holdovers, I guess you could say, from last year. One of them is this question around family leave. When parents have a child, will they be able to leave work for a period of time and have some financial support and so forth and so on? And last year, as you all know, a measure passed the State House. It was vetoed by the governor, I guess under the idea that this was going to, his objection to it, as I recall, was it called for a payroll tax deduction.
No, not deduction, payroll tax.
Payroll tax, right. And a couple of weeks ago, he met up with Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire, as we all know. They had a press conference there, and they unveiled a plan that would be a voluntary opt-in insurance plan where buttressed by the roughly 18,000 or so state workers between Vermont and New Hampshire that would give the kind of critical mass to kind of get the thing started. An insurance program would be set up to allow people to get, I think, 6 weeks of family leave at 60% of salary, I believe, is what they were talking about. And meanwhile, your colleagues in the State House have reintroduced some legislation around family leave. I believe it's slightly different in terms of what the payroll tax was going to be. I think I remember seeing 1.3 something from last year, and that's now around 0.93%, evenly divided between employers and employees. So I guess, do you think this bill, under perhaps these new dynamics in play this year in the legislature, has a chance of being successful, or is the governor going to kind of dig in on the voluntary insurance plan, and are we kind of moving towards a bit of a collision around that?
That's actually one of the 2 pieces of legislation that I've added my name to so far. So I did join, I think, 79 other legislators in co-sponsoring the Democratic version of the paid family leave plan. It's going to be really interesting to see how these 2 competing proposals, work their way through the legislature or where they wind up. I should have brought. I didn't bring my binders today and my notes from the campaign. I did have a chart that I printed out this morning and that shows the differences between the 2 plans. And I thought, oh, Kathleen, don't be such a nerd. But the reason that I am sort of, I guess, philosophically inclined to support the paid family leave plan that's being proposed by the legislature is because it really does get farther down that road that I believe in of creating an economy that is accessible and functional for everyone. So the governor's plan is voluntary. It's an opt-in. To me, I think about the times in my life when I would have used insurance like that. And some of those times are predictable and you can plan ahead for them, like maybe for a pregnancy, to use it after the birth of a child. Other times are utterly unpredictable. If you want to use that leave to care for a parent who suddenly falls ill or has a family health crisis, or if you yourself are recovering from an unexpected illness, and you haven't opted into that plan because maybe you're like all of us and you think, well, things like that are never going to happen to me, or I can't afford that plan right now, so it'd be nice, but I'm not going to do it, then that's not going to be available to you, is my understanding anyway. So I like the idea of creating a broader pool that's available to all working Vermonters, so it's there if they need it. The Democrats' plan also covers more people. It provides a higher rate of reimbursement, and I believe it's a lower rate of contribution. So I think, again, if I had brought my chart, but anyway, I'm in favor of it because it's more all-encompassing. So I think it's going to make it more useful for working families. Mm-hmm. These guys may disagree.
Yeah, you got that right. No, I think all the reasons why we need something like this, Kathleen is correct. This is an important issue, but I still have to come down on the idea of a voluntary plan. There's already a structure of paid family leave that many companies in Vermont offer. It's just not all companies can afford to do that. So we have dealt with a similar problem in another way, which is retirement. Not all companies can offer retirement plans. So we created something called the Green Mountain Retirement System, which is voluntary. Companies and individuals can participate and make contributions and create a retirement plan when their business, their employer can't offer it. And what that does is it fills in the gaps. And I think we should address the paid family leave issue in the same kind of way. And I think that's what the governor's proposal is getting at. And it certainly is different in terms of the coverage and in terms of the charges. But the way I think of it, I've always felt that it should be for if you have a new baby, if you're caring for someone who's sick in your family, or if you yourself are unable to work. And to me, it's really the Aflac model, the duck, because if you get sick, if someone you care for gets sick, or if you have a new baby, you should be able to get some sort of support to miss work, to have leave, to take care of that person, and then go back to work. The question is for how much, how long, and who's going to pay for it. And to me, taking the step of going to a voluntary program is the way to go. And it's true that there will be some people who don't opt in and then don't have the coverage. But that's going to be true of other forms of insurance too. And I don't want the state to take on a new entitlement and impose new taxes when we have this unfunded pension liability. Those pensions are an entitlement that we're already obligated to provide, and we did not fund it properly. So I'm really nervous about taking on a new mandatory entitlement when we don't know whether we can afford that. And I think 12 weeks at full pay is too much. I think it has to be less. This can't be a Cadillac. It has to be a Honda or a Ford Focus or something. We have to provide people with something, and it's particularly important at low income levels. If somebody's making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year and they want to take some time off, they probably can. But for a single mother or for a working Vermonters, a couple that have several children and then they have a new baby or they have illness in the family, that's really tough. Those are the people who really need it. And it wouldn't cost us that much to give the basic support to those working Vermonters. So I don't agree with all the details about the governor's plan, but I think the idea of linking it to state employees and then trying to do a two-state plan, I'm not sure that's going to work. We might have to pull it back to just Vermont state employees, but that gives you a pool to work from. And if people want this coverage, they should be willing to sign up and pay for it. And we're doing that, as I say, with the voluntary retirement program. So I'm hoping that we can somehow work between those two programs and come up with something that's going to help a lot of Vermonters. I'm a little bit worried that at some point the Democrats will just go ahead with what they have and the governor will throw up their hands, and then we'll end up with one of those kind of messy situations. But we'll see how long this spirit of collaboration lasts.
I'm sure it'll go on right through till the end of May.
Probably.
And I think that, stop me if I'm wrong, I think very small businesses are exempted from the Democrats' plan. I think you have to have 10 employees
But see, that's a problem
to be
with
required
it.
to pay in.
But that's so are their employers still covered even though they're not paying in?
Yeah, I think so.
And then who's bearing the cost of that? I mean, that's everybody, including a lot of Vermonters who will never use it and don't want it. And that's where I have a problem with this. But we'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know what Linda
Any
thinks.
thoughts on this subject, Linda, before we
Yes.
move on to the next
I have
big
some
thing?
thoughts. And so rolling back to your first question, part of the question where you said, will there be some kind of meshing between the governor and the Democratic Party? I listened to Commissioner Mike Pichik from the Department of Financial Regulation when he was on VPR, and I believe it was Representative Robin Scheid, and they were speaking. And I heard very strongly from the commissioner that, of course, we're going to talk, that you have to start to speak. I hope that, like Representative Browning said, the Democratic Party doesn't just say, no, we're just going to run with this. I have some concerns with our small businesses right here in our district, that if we're going to say you have 12 weeks, then we have to hire somebody else to cover that. And then while they're working, and now we have 2 employees going on here, it's a burden. I am concerned with regard to if the minimum wage passes as well, and there's a double burden on the small businesses here. Both of our districts and beyond in Vermont. I also, to the governor's plan, it's open for other states to join in as well, which creates a bigger pool, and that may work, may not work. I think that reaching out, it goes back to the years ago, the old Blue Cross Blue Shield. You can get small companies and they can band together and put together a pool and a group. That worked for single moms. It worked for young adults who are going to work. So the concept is good. And once again, you know, the details of the Democratic plan, I have to really see it at the end of the day after it's morphed and it has amendments and it comes out before I would sign on to that bill, as well as with the governors before I can say I'm going to support that. But I can tell you that the government coming in and saying we're going to set up a whole mandatory structure in the state, that's expensive. Okay, that's another whole IT structure, that's another whole monitoring structure, that costs money. We could barely figure out how to fix the old structures that are in our computer systems right now, and everybody's, reaching for money. So I think we really need to look at it. While in theory, I do believe that paid family leave is vital to the state, I think we have to really be smart about how to get there. So as to signing on and sponsoring some bills, going back to Representative James's position, sometimes you don't sign on in the beginning because at the end of the day, your constituents do see what you signed on to. And if you sign on to something that changes entirely and then you have to vote no at the end of the day, be prepared to explain why. So sometimes when a controversial bill such as this comes out, I might back off and say I really need to flesh it out.
Before we leave this, I just wondered, do you think it's an option just to do nothing? I mean, just whatever the status quo is now?
No.
It's just good enough?
I think it would be good if we took a step. I mean, it could be that we could do. I mean, one thing the bill from last year came to Ways and Means, so we had a certain amount of testimony on it, and we tried to think of different things. And one thing we talked about, I may even have had an amendment about it in the committee, was just new babies. Just start with new babies, and whether it's adopted or a family birth, that you would get support just for the new baby. So it would just be maternal and parental, and start there. And then you could add in the other components of your own disability or caring for someone else. So that might be another way to do it. And maybe it wouldn't be best to start with new baby, maybe it'd be better to start with the others. But I think particularly toward the demographics, wanting more kids, if we started with the new baby, there's like 6,000 babies born in Vermont every year, and more that would be being adopted. So we're not talking about a huge amount. I mean, if we gave each of them a $2,000 payment, which would give low-income people a month off work, what is that, 12 million? I can't do the decimal points in my head. That's not an unbelievable amount of money. So it just gives you could start with one component and then expand it later. But we'll have to see what comes out.
Well, we could probably spend our entire show talking about this subject. There's so many fascinating angles to it. But let's move on to the minimum wage issue, which is another one that seems to be likely to come up before you again and again. A bill that was passed last year by the legislature and vetoed by the governor, the proposal being to raise Vermont's minimum wage from now it's $10.78 an hour in 2019. It was $10.50 last year, to $15 an hour by 2024. I suppose it probably would be, creeping up towards $12 an hour by 2024 if we did nothing. But is this a bill that you think has legs here? That this is an issue that a lot of people comes up all the time. One hears about not just in state politics but nationally as well. Bernie Sanders, I think we can thank for making this a broader issue than just one in Vermont. Is there enough momentum, do you think, and impetus among your colleagues to move this forward again?
Yeah, I think that it will come up again. I think that the House has always tended to care more about the paid family leave issue than the minimum wage, although certainly both of them passed last year and they might very well this year. But I think there's some issues with the minimum wage that people need to be aware of. When we're talking about the minimum wage, we're talking about trying to improve the situation of some of the lowest paid Vermonters, and some of those Vermonters also get government benefits. And the problem is that sometimes you lose your government benefits if your income goes up. So that's what's called the benefits cliff. So you could, if it's a single mother who gets child care assistance for her kids and other sorts of assistance, and she gets a raise, then her income goes up and she loses some of her assistance, she can end up actually worse off than before. So we really need to deal with that cliff issue. And that's one reason why last year when we increased what's called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a refundable tax credit to go to low-income Vermonters, that was actually a more reliable way to help those Vermonters than increasing the minimum wage. So we have those kinds of complexities. Are you really helping the people you say you want to help? The other thing is that the job market, the labor market, has actually kind of passed where we would have been, because the labor market is pretty tight. The wages that are being offered for entry-level work are actually probably ahead of where we would have been with that bill. I don't know. It's different in different parts of the state, but the legislative economist said that at our briefing, that the labor market has already outstripped you. Now, of course, we're going to have a recession. We always have a recession. We don't know what would happen then. But what this situation does is it reinforces my idea, which is that in an expansion, you don't need to raise the minimum wage because market pressures are driving it up. And if you're going to have a recession, and we're always going to have a recession, the last thing you want to do is to raise the minimum wage when you're going into a recession. Because if wages go up, even more people will lose their jobs. Even more people will have their hours cut because their labor is more expensive and the businesses are having less revenue. So I think that the minimum wage always sounds like it's this magic bullet that's going to solve things, but as with so many other things in Montpelier, it's more complicated than that. And I totally support this goal. I just want to make sure that what we do here actually helps those people instead of looking like it's going to help those people and not doing it. So I think it will come up again, but I'm not sure about what the family paid leave issue is more important given the way the market is happening. And maybe we need to go back to the earned income tax credit and increase that again. I'd be willing to raise taxes on the highest income Vermonters in order to provide more support at the low level. That would be more reliable, and it would happen through the recession. And that's more reliable. That's what we need for Vermonters.
Any other thoughts on this one before
Sure.
we move on? Okay.
So on the minimum wage issue, I think part that's missing in the concept is that it's not only low-income people who are going to be affected. We have retirees who have money, who will not go back to work and will go back to work for $15 an hour just to have something to do. So it's a lifestyle driver as well. And I think that whole target audience is not being incorporated. And I get the marketing of the minimum wage, but it does incorporate a different population as well. I heard that the Senate does not have a number yet, but a bill is coming through on minimum wage that is going to actually carve out for students, that brings it to $12 an hour, I believe. And so that's where they're going. I think, like Representative Browning said, the earned income tax credit is a very good vehicle. The purpose to, that has been used for many, many years, but I think blending the two is crucial. And I'm actually working on something like that, and hopefully with Representative Browning it'll flesh out. And so we need to blend it for Vermont. You can't just have one or the other. My biggest fear, of course, is when you couple it with paid family leave, and I'm concerned that then it's going to be too much of a burden and too much government regulation on the businesses and suppression.
I wanted to give us all a chance to talk a little bit about the housing and the Act 250 revision, I gather, is in the works. I keep on hearing from just about everybody I talk to, it seems like, certainly everyone who's under the age of 40, that buying a house in Vermont is an expensive proposition. It's hard to find good housing here. Not just for folks who could qualify for affordable housing, but workforce housing, as I believe the expression goes. And I guess I was just wondering, Representative Sullivan, I know you're very interested in the Act 250 rewrite or revision of legislation that was first crafted 50 years ago, if I were,
Right.
or something like that. That's kind of scary.
I'm going to take your word for it. Before I was born, I think.
I wish I could say the same, but unfortunately,
50 years.
not quite. I didn't know if there was a tie-in between the two things or not. Do you think, is there any aspect of the Act 250 rewrite that would open up the opportunity for more affordable housing in the state?
Well, of course, if businesses come in, and they come in through an easier process in different areas, it will bring more people in, and they will need more homes, and depending upon the type of business that comes in, it will determine the income level and whether it's service people, more green businesses, or larger corporations, more likely than not in our district, they would go more up towards the north. However, that will always drive housing. The key is, will the homes that we have right now be reinvented into becoming affordable housing because people need to sell because they can't afford to keep their homes. So will they lower the price of their homes, but then can the new people coming in still afford the upkeep? So will new businesses coming in drive the need for building smaller homes? And if so, where will that be? And how will it happen? Will zoning change? Will lots that are larger be turned into smaller lots? I think Act 50 will have something to do with that, but I don't think Act 250 is really the driving force for affordable housing.
Okay. What do you anticipate that bill involving, or revision of it? What might some of those aspects be?
So the commission was charged with coming out with a report, which they issued in January 2019. And the report was like 90 pages, and it had maybe 15 appendices that were 20-something pages each. And there's a bill that's like 80 pages long that is going to go over to the Agency of Natural Resources. I have found personally some issues with the lack of the legal process and the complexity, because in the Act 250 report and bill, they want to create an entirely new agency and remove one of the court appellate divisions so that it will move away from our historic case law and create a bottleneck in an agency that has no legal experience and will be controlled pretty much by a small panel. And so I am actually bringing a bill which deals with the de novo process and correcting that. The Act 250 report also deals with climate change, taking it from not mandatory, trying to get mandatory structures in it. I think that we need to not use this as a vehicle for climate change. I think there are better ways to get climate change done. I think we need to go back to how do we make sure that if somebody goes through a process and is a party in a process of Act 250, how do we not automatically stop businesses from coming in? How do we fix that? And I think I have grave issues with what's going on in this Act 250 bill. The other issue I have is that I know there were, the commission went around to various cities and they created a card game style, breakout sessions, but they specifically told everybody, don't tell me about your individual issues with Act 250. Answer the questions on the cards. The people who were controlling the tables, specifically and I was at some of them, specifically had the topics so that they could kind of guide the way they wanted the outcomes to be. And so I think that, I know in Rutland, I just spoke this morning in Rutland, and in our own district, I have grave issues with not only having the panel that was on the commission, we now have the chair is from that panel, who is the chair of Agency of Natural Resources, is the chair of Natural Resources in the House, was the chair of the commission. So she is going to be the person who determines if any testimony goes through, what testimony goes through, and what happens. I think that this bill is going to pass. I think people worked on it for over a year, and I think the drive is to get it through. So I believe that people need to come up to Montpelier, and we need to get control of the discussion and make sure that we look through this bill very carefully.
And one of the big criticisms of Act 250 over the years has been it's too unpredictable. It's too long. Or business folks I've talked to over the years have said, well, I put in my proposal, and then a couple years later maybe they've acted on it, maybe not, or I'm bounced out on one of these 6 criteria, and it just is too long and too cumbersome a process. And if that could be streamlined somehow or made more predictable or whatever, they could live with it better.
And that's my bill.
And that's key. And the streamlining the process so you have more predictability, you find out sooner, is really important. The only thing I will say as someone who's served on the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board of Adjustment in Arlington is that sometimes people propose things that blatantly violate the rules on the books, and then they're surprised that they can't get their development through. So I would just say that, you know, there's a couple of different sides, but I totally think it should be more predictable, and as long as we can protect the things about Vermont that we care about. But I'd like to go back to the housing issue for a second. If you want more quote-unquote affordable housing, it seems to me there's two ways to do it economically. Either you have to have more housing built, whether it's apartments or, you know, workforce housing, starter housing. I actually think apartments may be more important than the housing. Or you have to provide more purchasing power to the people who are unable to rent the apartment or unable to buy a house. So which way do we want to go? And actually in Vermont we're trying to do both, because last session we passed $35 million housing bond that the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board is putting into effect and investing on new housing, but that's not going to be enough. It's coming in over time. Another thing we do is we have a first-time home buyers tax credit. So when you are buying your first home, there's a way to give you a little bit of a leg up with that down payment. Again, it's a small number of people, but for those people it really helps. So those are some of the things we can look at. I personally would like to see a housing credit, replace a refundable housing credit for low and middle income Vermonters, replacing the whole system of the renter rebate and the homeowner rebate oriented towards property taxes. Because what that system does is it actually gives you more support if you have a more valuable home because your property taxes are higher. And I understand why we do that, and I don't want to hurt anybody, but I'm not sure that fundamentally makes sense when we have a problem of people who can't get apartments at all, have no housing. You know, so I would like to look at that whole system of supporting renting and homeowners and figure out a way to get more for our money. And this would involve lowering the property tax rate so that the burden is not as great on people that own their home. Because to me, the most efficient way to do this is to get more purchasing power into the hands of the people who are struggling. That would be faster than waiting for more apartments and houses to be built or waiting for a streamlined Act 250. Now, where are you going to get that money? Again, sorry, gotta say it. I go back to this overall tax reform and maybe an increase. We lowered the tax rates on the higher income Vermonters last year, and that was part of a whole process of reform of the income tax. But I think that if we could do it to help the people at the bottom, I would like to see a housing tax credit at the bottom funded by an increase in the tax on the top, and I'm not afraid to say that.
We have a few minutes before you need to go here, but and I just wanted to kind of give you all a chance to talk a little bit about one hardy perennial issue in Vermont politics, and that's education questions. This year, Act 46 is kind of coming to its conclusion, I guess, one maybe or maybe not, because I gather there's a bill that is bouncing around in the legislature that might extend the deadline in order to allow some of these 30 or so communities that have been placed into I guess a forced merger is the popular term for it, and who are a little upset about that. 2 or 3 lawsuits out there, and they're concerned that they're not going to be able to put their budgets together in time for town meeting. And I think the deadline is July 1st of this year when all this is supposed to come to pass. The idea being that, you know, maybe we should give them a little more time. And I guess I just wondered, I'm assuming, Kathleen, this is probably going to come up before your committee. Has there been any talk about, well, maybe we ought to tweak Act 46 a little bit or give them some breathing room here to finish this off?
Well, the Education Committee has been really busy with this and one other issue, which I do want to quickly explain before we move on to Act 46, which is that the committee has already passed out unanimously a bill that I was very, very excited to see. It's called H3. And it's creating a working group that is going to take a really deep look at Vermont's educational standards around how we teach Vermont children about ethnic and social equity. And that's an exciting bill. I believe the testimony was really compelling, and we did spend a lot of time on that in the first week, and that's passed along now to our friends in appropriations because it has a little bit of money attached to the working group. But yeah, we did see a number of bills introduced around Act 46. some of them seem to have overlapping goals, and the committee has been taking testimony really largely only around one question, which is whether delaying that final Act 46 implementation deadline for 1 year would help or hurt, districts, Vermonters, and students. And we've heard conflicting testimony. We had a bunch of districts come in who said that that they had put a great deal of time and effort into proposing a plan for their district that was kind of shot down, as recently as this summer in November, and that they simply have not had time. And they make a compelling case that they need another year. We've had a lot of districts come in and say that they were able to put together a plan on short notice, or that it would be detrimental to their progress to have the progress delayed, that they've finally put together a fragile coalition and that they're finally gaining momentum, and they're finally getting to the other side of this, and that it will be harmful, to that process to have the brakes put on. And then we had districts come in who have testified that that Act 46 was controversial and difficult and fraught for their district, but that they've gotten to the other side and they're starting to see some benefits for kids. They're saving money, they're sharing staff and programs across the district. They have school choice maybe across 5 elementary schools, and that they're very glad to have it in their rearview mirror. Sort of a, let's quit dragging it out, move on, and we'll all be glad we did point of view. So we're hearing a lot of different points of view. Maybe there will be some kind of compromise we can come up with. We're taking more testimony next week. And I think one thing we've heard consistently across the districts, which was really interesting to me, is that one way or the other, whether it's now or in 6 months or a year, that we need to get the administrative part of Act 46 behind us so that schools can start to focus on Act 173. Which
special education
That's
bill.
the special ed bill, and I've been really interested to hear teacher after teacher, educator after educator, superintendent after superintendent say, Act 46 was a milestone bill in terms of governance. Act 173 is more transformational, it's more sweeping, it's going to have a bigger impact in the classroom and on the students in Vermont, and we need to start focusing on that 5-year timeline and how we're going to implement that. We need to move on because this is a big bill too.
Yeah,
Final thoughts from
I would just say I'm one of the people that would support having a 1-year delay. Maybe we could make it optional, so if there are districts that want to go ahead with what's been laid out, they can do that. And if there are those that want to delay, they can delay. I do think that waiting until after the lawsuits makes a certain amount of sense, because if you force all these mergers and then the lawsuit is successful in undoing it, how do you unwind that? There's no provision for unwinding these commingled budgets and new boards that are set up and old boards that have been dissolved. So to me, because of the lawsuits, it adds that aspect of how do we reverse it depending on how the lawsuits come out, in addition to the difficulty of coming up with the merged budgets in time for town meeting. So I have always felt that forced mergers was a bad idea, and I opposed Act 46 for that reason. We're definitely through it. It's worked in some places. We need to continue going for it. But most of the time, to me, you don't lose anything by taking it slow. And I know that may not be what some people want to hear, but I would like to see the 1-year delay in place. And I think it is for the sake of the students, because the adults are running around trying to do all these different budgets and objecting and suing and all this kind of stuff. They're not going to be doing educational policy. They're not going to be taking care of their students. The students are the whole point. And if Act 46 is really going to benefit them, let's take the time to do it right, rather than have this lawsuit and this backing up and going forward, making things confused for them.
Representative Sullivan, you get the last word.
Okay. Oh, so it's what I say. Eh? So I came in, of course, after Act 46 was brought in. However, the gripes that I'm hearing is Act 46 is the law. Some districts already did what they were supposed to do. So why should other districts not be forced to do it?
Oh, the same standard.
Right.
Yeah.
However, I tend to agree that a moratorium is okay right now because not all districts are one size fits all. And we have to look at the students and we have to look at each district. However, I do believe that it should not be used as a vehicle just to be an extension, to ask for another year's extension. During that moratorium, there should be some guidelines.
And July 1 of 2021 is
Right here.
Is it? No more.
2020.
2020, whatever, yeah. Okay. Well,
You're
great.
asking
Well,
for another delay.
yeah, right.
And there you
I
go.
just tried to sneak that in there. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Well, there are about 6 or 7 other hot topics to talk about, but I guess we'll have to leave it there for today. I hope we'll have you all back again later on in the session. We'll have a chance to update the viewers on how things have been going and what's happening, what's likely to go on between that point and the end of the session. But I guess we'll have to leave it at this for today. I want to thank you all very much for being with us today to share your thoughts about the start of the session. Great to have you all with us as well. I hope you've found it interesting and enjoyable and informative. And we'll see you again the next time. Have a great day.